I finally found you, Dad. Ethan on the park bench slowly lowered his newspaper and folded it. I'm sorry, he said calmly. What did you just call me? The girl didn't hesitate. Daddy. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a soft breath and shook his head. Well, that's definitely not right. He gave her a polite smile, the kind he used when speaking to strangers who had simply made an honest mistake. Kid, he said gently, I think you've got the wrong guy. But the girl looked more confused than convinced. You're not wrong, she insisted quietly. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something, he said. What's your name? Annie. Well, Annie, Ethan said kindly. My name is Ethan Calloway. He gestured toward the path that ran through the park. And my family's actually supposed to meet me here in a few minutes. The girl tilted her head. Your family? Yeah. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. My wife took my kids to get ice cream across the park. They should be walking back any minute. The screen lit up as he unlocked it. Look, he said. He opened the photo gallery and held the phone down so Annie could see. The picture showed Ethan standing beside a smiling woman and 2 children. A boy about 10 and a girl around 8 stood in front of them, both grinning widely while holding melting ice cream cones. That's my son Daniel, Ethan explained. He tapped the screen gently. And that's my daughter Lily. My wife took this picture last summer when we were visiting Lake Michigan. Annie studied the photo very carefully, her small brow wrinkled with confusion. But, Mom said you were my dad. Ethan's smile faded slightly. I'm pretty sure your mom didn't mean me. She said, my mom always talks about you. Ethan's expression tightened. She does? She nodded. She said you had to go far away for work. Her voice carried the simple certainty children often have when repeating things adults have told them. She said one day you'd come back and surprise me. But today, Annie continued, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. I saw you first. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Children sometimes misunderstood things, but this kind of misunderstanding usually didn't appear out of nowhere. Annie, he said gently, I promise you I'm not your father. She didn't argue. Instead, she slowly unzipped the front pocket of her backpack. My mom showed me your picture, she said. Her fingers pulled out something small and worn, a photograph. The edges were bent, and the colors had faded from years of being carried around. She held it up carefully. This is you. Ethan reached out and took the photo. The moment his eyes fell on it, the world seemed to tilt slightly. The man in the picture looked exactly like him. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same gray-blue eyes. But Ethan knew immediately that it wasn't him. It was Aiden, his twin brother. Ethan's hand tightened around the photo. 7 years. 7 years since he had last seen Aiden. 7 years since the fight that ended with a slammed door and words neither of them had ever taken back. He slowly handed the picture back. That's not me, he said quietly. Annie blinked. But it is. No. Ethan shook his head. That's my twin brother. The girl stared at him. You have a twin? Yeah. He leaned back slightly on the bench. His name is Aiden. Annie studied Ethan's face again, comparing it carefully with the photograph. But you look exactly the... That's how identical twins work. She seemed to think about that for a moment. Then she asked the question children always asked when something didn't make sense. So, where is he? Ethan didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he didn't know. He hadn't known for a very long time. Instead, he stood up from the bench. Well, he said gently, why don't we go find your mom first? Annie nodded. They walked across the grass together toward the bench where she had been sitting earlier. The bench was empty. Annie slowed her steps. She told me to stay right here, she said quietly. The park no longer felt like a public place. It felt like the edge of a story none of them had chosen, only stepped into. Annie was still holding the photograph when a voice suddenly called from behind them. Annie, the little girl turned so fast her backpack nearly slipped from her shoulders. Mom! Across the grass, a woman was hurrying toward them. Relief flooded Annie's face. She ran straight into her mother's arms. Lena Brooks dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms tightly around the child. I'm sorry, she whispered into Annie's hair. I'm so sorry I left you alone that long. I waited like you said, Annie replied. I know you did. Lena held her for a moment longer before finally looking up. That was when she saw Ethan, and the world seemed to stop. Her body went completely still. For a second, she looked like someone who had just seen a ghost walk out of the past. Her lips parted slowly. Aiden? Ethan felt the familiar tension tighten in his chest. He had heard that name already today. But the way she said it now was different. Lena stood up quickly, her eyes never leaving his face. You came back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I knew you would. Before Ethan could respond, she stepped closer, her hands lifted instinctively toward his arm, as if she needed to touch him to be certain he was real. Ethan started to speak. I think you... But Lena had already grabbed his sleeve. She pushed the fabric up his forearm quickly. Ethan blinked in surprise. What are you? Lena's eyes scanned his skin urgently, and then her expression froze. The relief disappeared. Her hand slowly loosened its grip. No, she whispered. She stepped back. Her eyes moved across Ethan's face again, studying him more carefully this time. The resemblance was still there. The same height, the same posture, the same sharp gray-blue eyes. But now the differences were visible too. The shape of the eyebrows, the slight scar beneath his brow, and most importantly, the birthmark wasn't there. Lena swallowed. You're not Aiden. Ethan calmly pulled his sleeve back down. No, he said quietly. I'm not. Annie looked between them in confusion. Mom, that's Daddy. Lena knelt beside her daughter again. Her voice softened immediately. Sweetheart, remember the picture I showed you? Annie nodded. The one with Daddy. Yes. Lena brushed a loose braid from Annie's forehead. That photo is my father, but the man in front of me is not him. Annie frowned. But they look exactly the same. They do, Lena said gently. Because your dad has a twin brother. Annie blinked. A twin? Lena nodded. Yes. Your father and his brother were born only minutes apart. She glanced briefly at Ethan. We haven't seen him in many years. Then she looked back at Annie. I told you once that your father had a twin brother, remember? Annie's brow furrowed as she tried to recall. You said they stopped talking. That's right. Lena sighed softly. I never thought we'd meet him like this. She looked at Ethan again, still slightly shaken. For a moment I truly believed you were my husband. Ethan nodded calmly. That seems to be happening today. Lena gave a tired half smile. Aiden has a birthmark on his arm, she explained, gesturing toward her own forearm. A small crescent-shaped one. That's why I checked. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. Reasonable method. Annie looked at Ethan again with renewed curiosity. So if you're not my dad? Ethan crouched slightly so he was at her eye level. I'm your uncle, he said gently. Annie's eyes widened. My dad's twin brother. That's right. She considered this carefully for a few seconds. So I still found family, she said finally. If this moment touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from because we love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you believe family can appear when we least expect it, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. The simple sentence caught Ethan off guard. Lena looked down at her daughter, then back at Ethan. For a brief moment, the tension in her face softened. Yes, she said quietly. You did. Just then, footsteps approached from the path. Noah Mercer walked toward them, adjusting his coat as he arrived. He stopped when he saw Lena. Well, he said to Ethan quietly. This situation just got more interesting. Ethan nodded slightly. Yes. He looked at Lena again. And I think we all have a lot to talk about. Something tied to a brother Ethan had not seen in 7 years, and to a family he had never expected to meet. Lena did not sit down right away. She stood facing Ethan with one hand resting on Annie's shoulder, as if some part of her still expected the world to shift again and prove this was all a mistake. The late afternoon sun had begun to soften, turning the edges of Grant Park gold. Long shadows stretched across the grass. Families drifted toward the sidewalks. The city was settling into evening, ordinary and unaware. Nothing about the moment felt ordinary anymore. Noah glanced from Lena to Ethan, then to Annie, who was still hugging the old photograph like it had become more valuable in the last 10 minutes. I'm going to guess, Noah said carefully. This is not the kind of family reunion anyone planned. Lena let out a tired breath that was almost a laugh, though it carried no humor. No, it isn't. Ethan gestured toward the bench. Sit down. She hesitated, then finally nodded. Annie climbed onto the bench first, and Lena sat beside her, one arm still around the little girl as if she needed to keep touching her to be sure she was safe. Ethan remained standing for a moment, then sat at the far end. Noah stood nearby, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a lawyer who had just wandered into the wrong chapter of someone else's life. Ethan's eyes stayed on Lena. Start from the beginning. Lena lowered her gaze to Annie for a second. Sweetheart, why don't you show your picture to Mr. Noah? Annie obediently held the photo out. Noah took one look at it, then looked at Ethan, his expression flattening into disbelief. Well, he murmured, that's unsettling. Join the club, Ethan said. Lena folded her hands together tightly in her lap. I met Aiden 7 years ago in Detroit. That caught Ethan's attention at once. 7 years, he repeated. That's about the same time he vanished from everyone who knew him. Lena gave him a tired look. He didn't vanish. He ran. Ethan's jaw tightened. That sounds like him. Lena ignored the edge in his voice. He told me he had family in Chicago. A brother. He said you were brilliant, impossible, and proud enough to argue with a brick wall. Noah coughed softly, disguising a laugh. Ethan didn't smile. He always had a gift for making enemies sound poetic. Lena looked out across the park for a moment before continuing. At first, I thought he was just another man carrying too much damage and trying to dress it up like mystery. But he was kind, especially with Annie after she was born. At that, Annie leaned slightly against her mother's side, listening quietly. He talked about you sometimes, Lena said. Not often, but enough for me to know the wound never really closed. Ethan stared at her. My brother never liked talking about wounds. He preferred causing them. He regretted whatever happened between you. There it was, the sentence Ethan had been expecting and dreading since Annie first handed him the photograph. He looked away toward the fountain. Regret is cheap. Lena's voice softened. Not when it keeps a man awake at night. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the faint bark of a dog somewhere down the path. Then Annie spoke. Mom used to say Daddy would sit by the window when it rained. Lena nodded, gently smoothing one of the girl's braids. He did. Annie turned to Ethan. Did you do that too? The question was so innocent it almost hurt. Ethan answered honestly. No. I work when it rains. Noah glanced at him. That may be the saddest rich man's sentence I've ever heard. Annie seemed to consider this deeply, as children did when adults said things they didn't mean as confessions. Lena drew a slow breath. I told Annie about Aiden's twin brother a long time ago, just enough so she'd know there was family somewhere in the world, even if she never met you. Ethan turned back to her. Why? Because children should know they belong to more than fear. That line sat between them for a moment. Lena continued. I never expected her to see you like this. I certainly never expected you to be sitting in a park reading a newspaper like a retired senator. Noah smiled. Ethan ignored him. I brought Annie to Chicago because Aiden wanted me to. Ethan's expression sharpened. When, 2 weeks ago, before he disappeared again, the wind seemed colder after that. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice controlled. Disappeared how? Lena hesitated. Not because she was inventing anything, he thought, but because she was choosing how much to reveal. He came home one night with blood on his shirt, she said. Annie stiffened beside her. Lena immediately rubbed the child's back. It wasn't his blood. Lena added quietly. At least, that's what he told me. Noah shifted his weight. That's never comforting. He said he'd made mistakes. Bad ones. The kind that don't stay buried. Lena swallowed. He told me that if anything happened to him, I was to come to Chicago. Find Ethan. Find the brother who still knew how to fight without losing. Ethan let out a short, humorless breath. That sounds generous. Coming from a man who spent his life setting fires and assuming someone else would carry water. Lena met his eyes. Maybe. But he trusted you. I'm not sure that's a compliment. Annie looked between them. Were you mad at Daddy? The directness of children was a form of mercy and violence all at once. Ethan held her gaze. Yes. Are you still? He could have lied. Adults did that all the time when children asked questions too large for their age. But Annie had already walked up to a stranger in a public park and called him family. She had earned something better than a lie. I don't know, he said. Annie seemed satisfied with the honesty. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. The paper was creased and softened at the corners from being carried too long. He told me to give you this if I found you. Ethan took it slowly. His own name was written across the front in a handwriting he recognized instantly. Aiden's. Messy, slanted, impatient handwriting that looked as if it resented being forced into straight lines. For a moment, Ethan didn't open it. He just stared. Noah's voice dropped. You okay? No, Ethan said. That was the first entirely truthful answer he had given all afternoon. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. N. If Lena reached you, then everything went wrong faster than I planned. I'm sorry. You were right about more than I wanted to admit. But Annie didn't ask for any of this. Neither did Lena. Help them if you can. For once in my life, I'm asking instead of running. Aiden. Ethan read the note twice. The old anger rose first. Of course it did. Years of silence reduced to 6 lines and an apology written in the tone of a man leaving a coat at the dry cleaners. But behind the anger was something worse. Fear. Not fear for himself. That would have been familiar, manageable, almost boring. Fear that Aiden had finally stepped so far into darkness that he had sent his wife and child toward the only brother he believed might still pull them back out. Annie studied Ethan's face. What did Daddy say? Ethan folded the letter once more before answering. He said he wants me to help you. Annie nodded as if that settled everything. Good. Noah looked at the child, then at Ethan. You know, this is the point where normal people call the police, hand over the note, and go home to dinner. Ethan slid the letter into his coat pocket. Then it's fortunate you don't work for normal people. Lena's face tightened. There's more. Ethan looked at her sharply. She lowered her voice. Aiden thought someone was following us before we left Detroit. Who? He never said a name. Just that if we noticed the same car twice, we were to keep moving. Noah's gaze immediately lifted to the streets bordering the park. And did you notice the same car twice? He asked. Lena's silence was answer enough. Ethan stood. The bench, the park, the evening crowd, suddenly none of it felt safe. What kind of car? Dark sedan, tinted windows. Noah muttered something under his breath. Annie slid off the bench and reached for her mother's hand. Are the bad people here? Lena knelt at once. I don't know, baby. But Ethan did not like the sound of don't know. In his world, uncertainty was often just danger that had not introduced itself yet. He scanned the street beyond the trees. Cars moved steadily through the city's veins. Most meant nothing. Maybe all of them did, but maybe one didn't. He looked down at Annie. Do you trust me? He asked. The question surprised even him. Annie answered without hesitation. Yes. That simple certainty landed harder than it should have. Ethan turned to Lena. You and Annie are not staying in this park another minute. Lena rose slowly. Where are we going? With me? Noah arched a brow. And how exactly are you explaining that to Caroline? Ethan gave him a flat look, carefully. For the first time since she had rushed back into the park, Lena's guarded expression cracked into something close to relief. Not complete trust, not yet, but relief. And sometimes, for people who had been running too long, relief was the first form of faith. As they started toward the east exit, Annie slipped her small hand into Ethan's free hand as naturally as if she had always known where it belonged. He looked down at her, startled. She didn't look up. She just walked beside him, carrying her photograph in one hand and trusting him with the other. And as the city darkened around them, Ethan Calloway understood something with sudden, unwelcome clarity. His brother had not sent him a letter. He had sent him a life. Ethan did not like leaving things to chance. As they walked toward the edge of Grant Park, he kept his pace steady, neither rushing nor slowing down. In the world he came from, panic attracted attention. Calm looked like control, but his eyes were working constantly. Every car, every person lingering too long, every reflection in the glass of nearby buildings. The evening air had turned colder. Streetlights flickered on one by one along Michigan Avenue, casting pale circles onto the sidewalks. The city was shifting from afternoon to night. Annie held his hand without hesitation, her small fingers wrapped around his like it had always been natural. Lena noticed it too. For a moment she said nothing. Then quietly, as they reached the sidewalk, she spoke. You didn't have to do this. Ethan kept walking. Yes, he said. I did. Lena looked at him. You don't even know us. Ethan stopped at the curb and glanced both ways before crossing the street. Annie still beside him. That's not entirely true. Lena frowned slightly. You know my brother, he continued. Which means eventually his problems become mine. Noah let out a quiet sigh behind them. That is unfortunately the most accurate description of family I've heard all year. They reached the black sedan parked along the street. Ethan opened the rear door. Annie, climb in. She did without hesitation, sliding onto the leather seat and pulling her backpack into her lap. Lena hesitated before getting in. She looked once more across the park, as if half expecting Aiden to appear out of the trees at the last second with one of his reckless smiles. But the park remained quiet. She climbed in. Noah took the passenger seat while Ethan slid behind the wheel. The engine started with a soft, controlled hum. For several seconds, none of them spoke. Then Annie's voice came softly from the back seat. Uncle Ethan? The word still sounded strange. Yes? Are we going somewhere safe? Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. That's the plan. The car pulled into the evening traffic. Chicago moved around them like a living machine. Horns, buses, headlights, people rushing home. For most of them, it was just another weekday evening. For Ethan, something fundamental had shifted. He drove for several minutes before Noah finally spoke. So, Noah said carefully, what exactly is the plan beyond dramatic exits from public parks? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. We go to my place. Noah turned slightly in his seat. Your penthouse. Yes. With a missing twin brother. Yes. And a woman who thinks someone might be following her. Yes. Noah nodded slowly. I just want to be absolutely clear about the level of chaos we're committing to. Lena spoke quietly from the back. We won't stay long. Ethan shook his head. That's not how this works. Lena frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if someone really is looking for you, Ethan said calmly, then a hotel is the worst possible place to go. Too many cameras, too many records, too many questions. Noah glanced back at Lena. He's right, Ethan continued. My building has private security, underground parking, cameras on every floor. And your wife? Noah asked. Ethan paused briefly. She'll understand. Noah gave him a doubtful look but said nothing more. In the back seat, Annie was staring out the window, city lights reflected in her eyes. Mom? Yes, baby? Are the bad people going to find us? Lena hesitated. Ethan answered instead. Not tonight. The confidence in his voice was deliberate. Children listen to tone more than words. Annie seemed satisfied. She leaned back against the seat and hugged the photograph of her father again. Lena watched her quietly. Then she looked forward at Ethan. You really haven't spoken to Aiden in 7 years? No. You never tried to find him? Ethan's hands remained steady on the steering wheel. No. The honesty was blunt. Lena studied his profile in the dim light of the dashboard. He talked about you more than you think. That seems unlikely. He said you were the smartest person he knew. Ethan let out a short breath. That doesn't mean he liked me. He respected you. That word lingered. Respect was complicated between brothers, especially identical twins who had chosen very different lives. Ethan finally asked the question that had been waiting since the park. What kind of trouble did he get into? Lena looked down at Annie first. The girl's eyes were closed now, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Her breathing had slowed. Only then did Lena answer. Financial records. Noah turned in his seat. What kind of financial records? The kind powerful people don't want anyone to see. Ethan felt something cold settle inside his chest. He had spent 20 years building one of the most successful financial technology companies in the country. He understood money, and he understood the kinds of secrets money could hide. Did he tell you who was after him? Ethan asked. No. Did he mention companies? No. Banks? No. Lena sighed softly. He said something else. Ethan waited. He said if anything happened to him, the safest place Annie could be was with you. The car stopped at a red light. Chicago traffic moved slowly around them. Ethan stared at the intersection ahead. My brother, he said quietly, always had terrible timing. The light turned green. They drove another 15 minutes before the skyline shifted and the streets grew quieter. Glass towers rose above them. Private entrances. Underground parking ramps. The part of the city where wealth tried to look invisible. Ethan turned into a descending driveway and the car slipped into the underground garage. Security cameras rotated silently overhead. 2 guards stood near the elevator lobby. Both men straightened immediately when they saw Ethan step out of the car. Good evening, Mr. Calloway. Evening. Their eyes flicked briefly toward Lena and Annie but asked no questions. That was why Ethan paid them well. They entered the elevator. As the doors closed, Annie stirred slightly. Her eyes opened halfway. Uncle Ethan? Yes? Do rich buildings always feel this quiet? Ethan thought about that. Yes, he said. Sometimes too quiet. The elevator rose smoothly toward the top floors. 30 seconds later, the doors opened into Ethan Calloway's penthouse. Glass walls, city lights stretching across the horizon, a space designed for success, control, and solitude. Annie stepped out first. Her eyes widened. Wow. Lena stood still behind her. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to believe they might actually be safe. But Ethan knew something Lena didn't yet. When people like Aiden ran from powerful enemies, the story rarely ended with a quiet elevator ride. It usually ended with someone coming to collect the debt. And Ethan had a growing feeling that whoever was chasing his brother had just gotten closer. The penthouse had never felt this occupied. For years, Ethan Calloway had treated the place the way some men treated. Expensive watches, polished, functional, admired from a distance. but never truly lived in. It was 40 floors above the city, wrapped in glass and silence, with furniture chosen by designers and books arranged by color rather than memory. It impressed people. That had always been enough. Tonight, it felt different. Annie stood just inside the doorway, turning slowly in a circle beneath the warm, recessed lighting. Her small backpack hung from one shoulder, and her pink jacket looked even thinner in a place this large. She stared out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the lights of Chicago scattered below like someone had overturned a box of stars. "Do people really live up this high?" she asked. Ethan set his keys in a bowl near the entrance. "Some do." Annie turned to him. "Doesn't it make them lonely?" Noah made a quiet sound that was almost a laugh. Ethan loosened his tie. "You ask a lot of difficult questions for someone your size." "She gets that from her father," Lena said. The sentence came out before she could soften it. For a second, the room went still. Ethan looked away first. "I'm sure she gets other things from him too." Lena lowered her eyes, tired enough now that she no longer had the energy to defend every mention of Aiden. Annie had already moved on. Children often did. They stepped over emotional landmines adults spent years circling. She walked toward a long cream-colored sofa and touched the fabric with careful fingertips, as if she were in a museum and uncertain what was allowed. Noah took off his coat and draped it over the back of a chair. "Before this turns into a guided architectural tour, can someone explain what happens next?" Ethan pressed a button on the wall. Soft lights brightened in the kitchen. "Next," he said, "we eat." Lena blinked at him. "Eat?" "Yes." Noah looked almost offended. "You dragged me across downtown for a possible kidnapping, a long-lost twin scandal, and a child with a mystery photograph. And your first move is dinner?" Ethan shrugged once. "People think better when they're fed." He glanced at Annie. The child was trying not to look tired, which only made it more obvious. There was a stiffness in the way she stood, the kind children developed when they were pushing themselves beyond their natural limit because the adults around them were frightened. "How long since she ate?" Ethan asked. Lena hesitated. "Around noon." Noah checked his watch. "It's nearly 7. Ethan opened the refrigerator. It was stocked the way rich men stocked things when they employed staff, but rarely noticed what appeared there. Sparkling water, fruit, expensive cheese, fresh vegetables, leftovers packed in glass containers. Annie wandered closer and peered around the kitchen island. "Do you have grilled cheese?" Ethan looked at her. Out of all the things in a penthouse kitchen worth asking about, that was the question. He found himself almost smiling. "I'm a 40-year-old man with 2 children. Of course I have grilled cheese." That finally drew a real smile from Annie. Lena watched the exchange in silence. Something in her face softened, though the worry remained lodged behind her eyes. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and set a skillet on the stove. Noah stared at him. "You cook?" "I can assemble survival-level comfort food. Your reputation on Wall Street just dropped 3 points." "Good." Annie climbed onto one of the high stools by the island while Lena stayed standing, as if sitting down would mean surrendering to exhaustion. Ethan laid slices of bread on the counter, added cheese, buttered the outside with the practiced indifference of a man who had done this for children before, and set the sandwiches in the pan. The smell filled the kitchen almost immediately: warm bread, melting cheddar, butter browning at the edges. For the first time since Grant Park, the room felt human. Annie rested her chin on the countertop. "My mom makes hers with tomato soup." Ethan opened a cabinet. "So do I." Noah shook his head in disbelief. "I have known you 12 years and somehow this is the most surprising thing I've learned." "You should get out more," Ethan said. Lena finally sat at the far end of the island. Her shoulders sagged as if her body had waited all day for permission. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ethan glanced up from the stove. "For what?" "For bringing this to your door." He turned the sandwiches carefully. The bread had gone golden. "This didn't start at my door," he said. "It started long before today. That doesn't make it fair." He gave a small, tired shrug. "Fairness is a slogan, not a system." Noah looked at him. "That would sound wiser if you weren't making grilled cheese at the time," but Annie listened closely. "Mom says life isn't fair," she said. "She says people have to choose whether they're still kind anyway." The words settled over the room with more weight than a 6-year-old voice should have carried. Ethan poured tomato soup into a pot and warmed it slowly. "Your mother sounds smarter than most board members." Annie nodded with full sincerity. "She is." Lena gave a faint, exhausted smile. When the food was ready, Ethan set a bowl and a sandwich in front of Annie first, then one before Lena, then Noah. He kept his own plate last. Another habit from family life, he realized, one he had not thought about in years. Annie took one bite, closed her eyes, and sighed. This is really good. Noah tasted his and looked annoyed. I hate that she's right. For several minutes, no one said much. The silence was not awkward. It was the silence of tired people remembering that food could still anchor them when the rest of life had come loose. Outside the windows, the city glowed and moved without them. Inside, the child who had crossed a park to find her father dipped grilled cheese into tomato soup, while a billionaire watched over the stove and pretended this was remotely normal. When Annie had eaten half her sandwich, her eyelids began to droop. Lena touched her hand. Slow down, baby. I'm not sleepy, Annie murmured, which was the exact way sleepy children always announced themselves. Noah set down his spoon and turned toward Lena. Now that she's eating, maybe you can tell us the part you skipped in the car. Lena stiffened slightly. What part? The part where a man comes home with blood on his shirt, says powerful people might be looking for him, sends his wife and child to Chicago, and somehow you still haven't told us what kind of people we're dealing with. Ethan leaned one hip against the counter, arms folded. He had been waiting for this too. Lena took a breath. Aiden worked for a shipping company outside Detroit. That much I figured, Ethan said. It wasn't really a shipping company. Also figured. She rubbed her palms together slowly, as if warming them over an invisible fire. He handled paperwork, accounts, transfers, things moving through ports that weren't supposed to move. Noah's expression sharpened. Money laundering? Lena gave him a tired look. That's the polite version. Ethan's face changed almost imperceptibly. The room seemed to narrow around that word. He had built a legal fortune by understanding exactly how illegal fortunes disguised themselves. Did he steal something? Ethan asked. Lena looked at him. Yes. What? Records. Noah sat up straighter. Digital? Some, but not only digital. Names? Ethan asked. Lena nodded. Names, account numbers, shell companies, transfers, politicians, people in customs, maybe judges. I don't know all of it. Aiden never told me everything because he thought partial truth was safer. Ethan's jaw hardened. That sounds like him too, Lena continued quietly. He said the men behind it were the kind who never forgive embarrassment. He said once they realized what he had taken, they would come for all of us. Annie looked up at that. Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Lena's face softened instantly. Baby, finish your soup. Were those the bad people? Lena hesitated. Ethan answered for her. Yes. Annie lowered her eyes and took another small bite. Noah was already thinking ahead. Ethan could tell. Legal exposure, security, police, federal angles. The man's mind moved like a filing cabinet under pressure. So where are the records now? Noah asked. Lena swallowed. Aiden hid them. Where? He didn't tell me. That answer hung in the air. Ethan pushed away from the counter. No. He told you something. Lena met his eyes. Only this. If anything happened and we got to you first, then you would know how to find the rest. For the first time all evening, Ethan looked genuinely irritated. That is exactly the kind of dramatic nonsense my brother would think was helpful. Noah nodded. Agreed. Lena's voice dropped. He also said not to trust anyone who seems too eager to help. Noah raised one eyebrow. I already dislike him. Annie put down her spoon, but Uncle Ethan is helping. The room quieted. Lena looked at her daughter, then at Ethan. He said you were the exception. Those 6 words landed harder than the letter had. Ethan turned away, looking out at the city lights. For years he had built a life defined by control, distance, and measurable outcomes. Numbers did not betray you. Structures held. Contracts meant something. But now his brother's invisible hand had reached into that carefully managed life and left him standing in his own kitchen with a frightened woman, a child who trusted too easily, and the growing certainty that dangerous men were already moving toward them. Behind him, Annie's stool creaked softly. Uncle Ethan? He turned back. Yes. Can I call my dad if we find him? No one in the room answered immediately. Then Ethan crossed back to the island and rested a hand gently on the back of her chair. Yes, he said. You can. Annie seemed relieved by that simple promise, and Ethan, hearing himself make it, understood with sudden clarity that this was the first truly reckless thing he had done in years. Annie fell asleep before the dishes were finished. It happened quietly. One moment she was sitting on the stool with her spoon resting in the bowl of tomato soup, blinking slowly while trying to listen to the adults talk. The next moment her chin dipped forward and her eyes closed for good. Lena reached out instantly, steadying her before she slipped sideways. Ethan watched the small scene from across the kitchen. For all the complicated problems suddenly pressing into his life, that simple image carried the most weight. A child who had traveled across states, waited in a park for a father who never came, mistaken a stranger for family, and still fallen asleep believing she was safe. He stepped forward. "Let me." Lena looked up. Ethan lifted Annie carefully from the stool. She was lighter than he expected. Children always were when adults carried them fragile in a way that made responsibility feel heavier than their weight. Her head rested against his shoulder without waking. "Where?" Lena asked quietly. Ethan nodded toward the hallway. "Guest room." The penthouse had several, though most had never been used for anything more meaningful than visiting colleagues who preferred luxury to hotels. Tonight, one of them would finally become what it was meant to be. The bedroom lights came on softly as he pushed the door open with his shoulder. A large bed, white sheets, and a wide window overlooking the river filled the room. Ethan set Annie down carefully. She shifted once under the blankets but didn't wake. Lena stood in the doorway watching. Her eyes were softer now, though worry still lived behind them. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged slightly. "Kids should sleep when they're tired." "That's not what I meant." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned off the light, leaving only the dim glow from the hallway. They stepped back into the living room where Noah was leaning against the kitchen counter, reading something on his phone. He looked up. "She out?" "Yes," Ethan said. Noah slipped the phone into his pocket. "Good. Because the adult part of this conversation is about to get worse." Ethan poured himself a glass of water. Lena sat slowly at the edge of the sofa, rubbing her temples as if the exhaustion had finally found her. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Noah gestured toward the phone. "I ran a quick search on that shipping company you mentioned. The one Aiden worked for." Lena looked up. "And?" Noah exhaled. "It doesn't exist anymore." Ethan frowned slightly. "Companies close every day. Not like this one." Noah stepped closer and opened a news article on the screen. 3 weeks ago, the warehouse burned down." Lena sat upright. "Burned?" "Yes." Noah turned the phone so they could see. A photograph filled the screen. A blackened industrial building surrounded by police tape. Smoke still curling from broken windows. The headline read, "Detroit shipping facility destroyed in suspicious fire." Ethan read the article silently. "No casualties reported," he said. "Officially." Noah replied. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "That was the place Aiden worked." Ethan continued reading. The fire had started late at night. The building's surveillance system had been destroyed. Records lost. "Too neat, too convenient, too familiar." "Arson," Ethan said. "Most likely," Noah replied. "And if your brother stole records from the people who ran that operation," he didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to." Lena looked toward the hallway where Annie slept. "That means they know we're connected to him." Ethan nodded. "Yes." Noah leaned back against the counter again. "The bigger question is whether they know you're here." Ethan's gaze moved toward the tall windows overlooking the city. "Not yet." But even as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure. In his world, information moved quickly. Money moved even faster. And men who had enough of both rarely lost a trail once they started following it. Lena stood and walked slowly toward the window beside him. Chicago stretched out below them, thousands of lights, thousands of lives moving through the night. "It's strange," she said quietly. "What is?" "I spent weeks being afraid someone might find us." She looked at Ethan. "And now that we're here, I'm afraid they will." Fear worked that way. Ethan had learned that long ago. "You said Aiden hid the records," he said. "Yes." "Did he give you anything? A code? A place? A name?" "No." Ethan studied her face. "Think carefully." Lena closed her eyes, trying to remember. "He said one thing." "What?" She opened her eyes again. "He said you would know where to look." Noah groaned. "That's the kind of clue that gets people killed in movies." Ethan rubbed his forehead slowly. "My brother always loved puzzles." Lena watched him. "Did he ever leave you anything? Somewhere he trusted?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His mind had already started searching through old memories. Place, habits, arguments. Aiden had been reckless but not stupid. If he had hidden something important, he would have hidden it somewhere meaningful, somewhere tied to Ethan, somewhere he knew his brother might eventually think to look. Noah noticed the shift in Ethan's expression. "You've got a thought. Maybe." "What kind of maybe?" The kind that might get us answers. Lena stepped closer. What do you mean? Ethan turned from the window. There's a storage unit on the south side of the city. Noah blinked. You own a storage unit? My brother did. You just said you haven't spoken in 7 years. That doesn't mean I stopped noticing things. Ethan walked toward the kitchen and grabbed his car keys. If Aiden hid something important in Chicago, that would be the first place I'd check. Lena looked toward the hallway. But Annie, she stays here. With who? Noah. Hid. Apparently with me. Ethan nodded. You'll be fine. Noah gave him a look. I am a corporate lawyer, not a babysitter. Tonight you're both. Lena hesitated. You think the records are there? Ethan slipped on his coat. I think if my brother wanted me to find something. He paused. That's exactly where he'd hide it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The city hummed outside the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, Annie shifted in her sleep, and Ethan Calloway realized something unsettling. This was the first step into a trail his brother had designed, which meant Aiden had expected him to follow it, and that meant the real danger hadn't even started yet. The storage facility sat 3 miles south of the river, squeezed between a freight rail yard and a row of old brick warehouses that had survived more economic downturns than most of the companies that once used them. At night, the neighborhood looked like the kind of place the city had quietly forgotten: dim streetlights, chain-link fences, and long shadows stretching across cracked asphalt. Ethan parked the sedan near the security gate. For a moment, he didn't turn off the engine. The headlights illuminated the metal fence and the faded sign above the entrance. Lakeshore Storage. 24-hour access. Lena sat beside him in silence, her hands folded tightly together in her lap. You're sure about this place? She asked quietly. No, Ethan replied. He shut off the engine. But if my brother wanted to hide something where only I'd think to look, this would be high on the list. They stepped out into the cold air. The wind carried the smell of rust and diesel from the nearby rail yard. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train horn echoed through the night. Lena pulled her coat tighter around herself. Why here? She asked. Ethan walked toward the keypad beside the gate. Aiden and I rented a unit here years ago. For what? College. Lena frowned slightly. You stored furniture? Ethan almost smiled. No. He punched in a code. We stored things we didn't want our father finding. The gate clicked open. They stepped inside. Rows of storage doors stretched into the darkness like long metal corridors. Each unit was identical steel roll-up doors, concrete floors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Ethan walked confidently down the center lane. Lena followed closely. You think he kept the unit all these years? She asked. No. So how do you know? Ethan stopped in front of one door. Unit 314. He crouched slightly and ran his hand along the edge of the metal door. He didn't keep it, Ethan said. He bought it. Lena stared at him. How do you know that? Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small key. He held it up. This. Lena blinked. That was in the envelope? Ethan nodded once. When Aiden and I first rented this place 20 years ago, the owner gave us identical backup keys. He inserted it into the lock. For emergencies. The key turned. The door rolled upward with a metallic rattle that echoed across the storage rows. Lena held her breath. Inside the unit sat a single object, a heavy steel locker, about the size of a small filing cabinet. Nothing else. Lena stepped forward slowly. That's it. Ethan walked into the unit. Aiden never liked clutter. The locker had a digital keypad mounted on the front. No keyhole. No labels. Just a small screen waiting for a code. Lena looked at Ethan. You know the combination? No. Then how? Ethan stared at the keypad. His brother loved puzzles, and he loved irritating Ethan, which meant the answer was probably something simple, something obvious, something personal. Ethan typed 4 numbers. Nothing happened. He erased them. Tried another. Still nothing. Lena shifted nervously behind him. What if he changed it? Ethan thought for a moment. Then he sighed. My brother had a terrible sense of humor. He typed again. This time 6 digits. For a moment nothing happened. Then the screen blinked green. The lock clicked. Lena gasped softly. What was the code? Ethan pulled the door open. His birthday. Inside the locker were several thick folders. A small external hard drive, and a stack of printed documents bound with rubber bands. Lena stepped closer. That's everything. Ethan lifted one of the folders and opened it. Rows of numbers, bank transfers, account names, corporate registrations, shell companies layered on top of shell companies. Noah had been right. This wasn't just evidence. This was a map of a financial system that had been carefully built to hide money powerful people didn't want traced. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. Those are the records. Ethan turned another page. Names appeared now. Politicians, corporate executives, shipping companies, investment firms. Some of the names were familiar. Too familiar. Ethan felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Your husband didn't just steal documents, he said quietly. What do you mean? He stole leverage. Lena looked confused. What's the difference? Ethan closed the folder slowly. The difference, he said, is that money can be replaced. He tapped the papers. But secrets like these, he met her eyes, get people killed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The buzzing fluorescent light above them flickered softly. Lena's voice came out smaller now. So what do we do? Ethan looked down at the documents again. The scale of the information was enormous. If these records were real, they could destroy careers, companies, maybe entire political alliances, which meant one thing. The people chasing Aiden would never stop. Ethan closed the locker again and picked up the hard drive. We take this back. To your place? Yes. And then? Ethan paused. He had built his entire career on knowing exactly what to do next. But this was different. This was his brother's war. And now it had become his. Then, Ethan said quietly, we decide who can be trusted. Lena nodded slowly. They rolled the storage door down again and locked it. As they walked back toward the car, the wind picked up across the empty lot. Lena stopped beside the passenger door. You didn't have to do any of this. Ethan looked at her. My brother asked. That's not the same thing. No, Ethan agreed. He opened the car door. It isn't. But as they drove away from the storage yard, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone else now knew exactly where they had been. And somewhere in the city, the men who wanted those records were already beginning to move. The drive back to downtown Chicago felt longer than the trip out. Neither Ethan nor Lena spoke for the first few minutes after leaving the storage facility. The city lights moved past the windshield in quiet streaks, gas stations, empty intersections, the occasional late-night diner still glowing with neon. The hard drive sat in the center console. Small, ordinary, dangerous. Lena kept glancing at it as if it might suddenly explode. Do you think someone followed us? She asked finally. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. I didn't see anyone. That's not the same thing. No, he admitted. It isn't. They passed beneath an overpass. The shadow swallowed the car briefly before the headlights returned to the empty road ahead. Lena folded her hands together again. I wish Aiden had just told me everything, she said quietly. Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. That would have required him to trust people. He trusted you. Ethan didn't respond to that. Outside, the skyline of downtown Chicago grew larger with every mile. Lena turned slightly in her seat. Why did you guess the birthday for the code? Ethan shrugged. My brother liked to pretend he was clever. And he wasn't. He was. Ethan glanced briefly at the hard drive. But he also believed the simplest answers were usually the right ones. Lena studied his face in the dim glow of the dashboard. You miss him? The statement surprised him. I haven't spoken to him in 7 years. That wasn't my question. Ethan didn't answer. Because the truth was complicated. Anger and loyalty could live in the same place, especially between brothers. They reached downtown 20 minutes later. The underground garage of Ethan's building opened automatically when his car approached. Security cameras rotated slowly above the entrance. The same 2 guards stood near the elevator lobby. One of them stepped forward. Evening, Mr. Calloway. Ethan nodded. Everything quiet? Yes, sir. The guard's eyes flicked briefly toward Lena. Then he noticed the expression on Ethan's face and wisely asked no further questions. They stepped into the elevator. The ride upward felt strangely tense. 30 floors. 40. 50. The doors opened onto the penthouse floor. Noah was waiting in the living room. He looked up immediately when they entered. Well? Ethan tossed the hard drive onto the coffee table. We found something. Noah's eyebrows rose. That was fast. Too fast, Ethan replied. Noah picked up the drive carefully, as if it might bite him. This is it? Part of it, Lena said. There were documents too. Noah sat down and opened his laptop. If your brother stole what you think he stole, his fingers began moving across the keyboard. Then this may be the most dangerous USB drive in Chicago. The laptop screen glowed in the dim room. Files appeared. Dozens, then hundreds. Noah opened the first folder. Bank transfers. Account numbers. Corporate ledgers. He leaned back slowly. Oh my God. Ethan crossed his arms. That bad? Worse. Noah turned the screen toward them. These aren't just criminal accounts. He pointed at one name on the screen. That's a senator. Another file. That's a shipping magnate worth $4 billion. Another. That's a federal judge. Lena felt the room spin slightly. Aiden copied all of this? Yes, Noah said. And if even half of it is real, he looked up. Someone is going to kill to get it back. As if summoned by the words, Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Ethan glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Noah looked at him. Don't. Ethan answered anyway. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Mr. Calloway. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who is this? A man who knows you visited a storage facility tonight. Lena's stomach dropped. Ethan's expression didn't change. You have the wrong number. No, the voice replied. I have exactly the right one. A pause. Then the man continued. You have something that belongs to us. Ethan glanced briefly toward Noah. The lawyer had gone completely still. I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan said. Yes, you do. The voice lowered slightly. And so does the woman standing beside you. Lena felt her breath catch. The man knew she was there. How many men are outside your building right now? The voice continued casually. Ethan walked slowly toward the window overlooking the city. You tell me. The man chuckled softly. You're a smart man, Mr. Calloway. Another pause. Then the voice became colder. Which means you understand something very simple. What's that? If you want the little girl to see her father again. Lena's heart nearly stopped. You'll return what you found tonight. The call ended. The room was silent. For several seconds, no one moved. Noah finally spoke. Well, he said quietly. That escalated. Lena looked at Ethan. They know about Annie. Ethan stared out across the dark city. Yes. Noah closed the laptop slowly. And now, he said, we officially have a war. From the hallway came the soft creak of a bedroom door. Annie stood there, half awake, rubbing one eye. Mom? All three adults turned instantly. The little girl looked confused by the tension in the room. Are the bad people here? Ethan looked at her. Then he said the most honest thing he could. Not yet. But deep down, he knew the truth. They were already closer than anyone in the room wanted to believe. Annie stood in the hallway, her hair messy from sleep, one small hand still rubbing her eye. The room froze. Lena moved first. She crossed the living room quickly and knelt in front of her daughter, forcing a calm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, baby, she said softly. You should still be sleeping. Annie looked past her. Her gaze moved between Ethan and Noah. Even half asleep, children could sense when the air in a room had changed. You were talking loud, she said. Lena brushed her fingers gently through Annie's braids. Just grown-up stuff. Annie glanced toward the coffee table where Noah's laptop still glowed. Then she looked at Ethan. Did you find my dad? The question landed heavily. Ethan stepped forward. He crouched so he was eye level with her. Not yet, he said gently. Annie seemed to accept that answer with quiet patience. Children who had learned to wait often carried that patience like a second language. She yawned. Are the bad people here? Lena opened her mouth to answer, but Ethan spoke first. No. He kept his voice calm and steady. But we're being careful. Annie studied his face for a moment, as if measuring whether the answer was true enough. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. Lena stood and guided her back toward the bedroom. Come on, back to bed. Annie stopped at the doorway and looked back once more. Uncle Ethan? Yes. If the bad people come, she hesitated. You'll protect my mom, right? For a moment, Ethan couldn't answer. Then he nodded once. Yes. The girl seemed satisfied. She disappeared back into the guest room. The door closed softly. The apartment fell silent again. Noah let out a long breath. Well, he said quietly. That just became personal. Lena returned slowly to the living room. Her face had lost the last trace of color. They know about her. Ethan nodded. Yes. How? Noah gestured toward the laptop. The records. He leaned forward. Whoever called you probably has access to the same network Aiden stole from. Shipping logs, surveillance, financial monitoring. He looked at Ethan. And if they knew Lena traveled from Detroit, they followed the trail. Ethan finished. Lena sat down heavily on the couch. So what do we do? Noah closed the laptop. We have 3 options. Ethan crossed his arms. Let's hear them. 1, Noah said, raising a finger. We go to the police. Ethan shook his head immediately. No. Lena looked surprised. Why not? Because the names on that drive include a federal judge, Noah said, and probably several politicians. He tapped the laptop. This kind of corruption spreads everywhere. He looked at Ethan. If we hand this to the wrong officer, it disappears. Lena swallowed. What's option 2? We run. Ethan gave Noah a look. That's not an option. Agreed, Noah said. So that leaves option 3. Lena looked up. What's that? Noah's voice lowered slightly. We go on a fence. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Explain. We find someone powerful enough to expose this. Noah turned the laptop screen toward them again. Someone outside the system. A journalist? Lena asked. Too slow. A lawyer? Noah shook his head. Then he said the word quietly. Federal investigators. Ethan considered that. The FBI. Yes. Lena looked uncertain, but the man on the phone said they knew where we were. Ethan walked slowly toward the window again. The city stretched below them, quiet towers and distant traffic. They don't know everything yet, he said. Noah nodded. If they did, we wouldn't have gotten the phone call. Lena looked between them. So the call was a warning, Ethan said. Noah corrected him. A test. Lena frowned. What do you mean? They wanted to see how Ethan would react, Noah explained. Panic. Negotiate. Run. Ethan nodded slowly. But we did none of those things. Noah leaned back in his chair. Which means they're watching and waiting. The room grew quiet again. Finally, Lena spoke. Then we go to the FBI. Ethan turned from the window. Yes. Noah closed the laptop completely. But we don't walk into a random field office with a flash drive full of corruption. Ethan nodded. We find someone trustworthy. Lena asked quietly. How? Noah smiled faintly. Luckily for us. He opened his phone. I know someone. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Of course you do. Noah scrolled through his contacts. Former federal prosecutor. Now works financial crimes for the Bureau. He looked up, and more importantly, he pressed the call button. She owes me a favor. The phone rang once, twice. Then a woman's voice answered. Mercer. Good evening, Agent Sarah Chen, Noah said. I hope you're ready for the biggest corruption case of your career. There was a pause. Then the agent asked calmly, what did you find this time? Noah glanced at Ethan and Lena. A war, he said. And across the city, in places none of them could see yet, the people who wanted those records were already preparing to stop them. Noah stepped away from the window and moved toward the kitchen island as he spoke on the phone. Ethan and Lena watched him closely, both aware that the next few minutes could determine whether they survived what was coming. Sarah, Noah said into the phone, his tone shifting from casual sarcasm to professional seriousness. I'm not exaggerating this time. A pause. Then the voice on the other end spoke again, calm and measured. You always say that. I mean it tonight. Noah glanced at Ethan. We have financial records tied to multiple federal officials, corporate accounts, international shipping networks, and at least one judge. Another pause. This one longer. Then Agent Sarah Chen spoke again. You're not joking. No. What kind of records? Complete ones. Ethan stepped closer and spoke quietly so the phone could pick up his voice. This is Ethan Calloway. The silence on the line changed immediately. The Ethan Calloway? She asked. The only one. I know who you are. That's good, Ethan replied calmly. Because this situation is already bigger than any of us. Another pause. Agent Chen's tone shifted again. Start talking. Noah placed the phone on speaker. Lena listened carefully as Ethan explained. 2 weeks ago, my brother disappeared in Detroit, Ethan said. Tonight, we recovered a hard drive containing financial records connected to organized laundering operations. The files include names of politicians, business leaders, and several individuals inside the legal system. Chen spoke again. Where are you right now? Ethan hesitated. Somewhere secure. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting for the moment. Noah cut in quickly. Sarah. Someone already called Ethan tonight. What? They knew about the storage facility. Another pause. This time it was different. More serious. How long ago? Chen asked. About 40 minutes, Noah replied. And they mentioned a child. Lena felt her stomach tighten. Chen's voice lowered. Then you're already compromised. Ethan crossed his arms. That's what we assumed. Do not leave that location, Chen said firmly. Why? Because if they know you accessed those files, they'll try to recover them. That's already happening, Ethan said. Then listen carefully. The agent's voice had changed again. Professional. Precise. The FBI will take custody of those records. Noah glanced at Ethan. We expected that, but we're not bringing them to you. Chen didn't sound surprised. I wouldn't either. Lena spoke quietly for the first time. How do we know we can trust you? There was a small silence on the line. Then Chen answered, You don't. But you can trust this. Whoever built that financial network has been under investigation for 18 months. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You already knew. Not everything, Chen replied, but enough to recognize what you're describing. Noah leaned forward. So what happens next? We meet. Where? Chen thought for a moment. Union Station. Ethan frowned. That's a public place. Exactly, Chen said. It's also federal jurisdiction. Lena spoke quietly. When? 2 hours. Ethan checked the clock. Oniki Pem. That's late. Less chance of witnesses, Chen replied. Noah nodded slowly. Bring the drive, Chen continued. And Mr. Calloway. Yes. Bring your courage. The line went dead. The room was silent again. Lena looked at Ethan. Union Station. Noah leaned back in his chair. That's bold. Ethan walked slowly toward the hallway where Annie was sleeping. Bold might be the only thing keeping us alive. He stopped outside the guest room door and listened. The child was still asleep, breathing softly, unaware of the storm building around her. Lena stepped beside him. Do we bring her? Ethan thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. No. Why? Because if something goes wrong tonight, he looked at her. She needs to be somewhere safe. Noah stood up from the table. I'll stay with her. Ethan nodded. Lena hesitated. But what if the men who called find this place? Ethan looked toward the windows overlooking Chicago. They might. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Then he turned back. But if they do, his voice was calm. They'll discover something important. Lena waited. What? Ethan picked up his coat. That they chose the wrong man to threaten. Across the city, at that exact moment, a black sedan turned slowly onto the street outside Ethan Calloway's building. Inside the car, a man spoke quietly into a phone. They found the records. A voice replied from the other end. And the girl? The man looked up at the tower rising above him. She's inside. The voice on the phone became colder. Then don't lose them again. The car engine shut off, and the real hunt began. The city felt different after midnight. Chicago was still alive, cars still moved through the streets. Lights still glowed in apartment towers, but the rhythm had slowed. The noise had softened. The shadows had grown longer. Ethan Calloway drove through the quiet streets with the steady focus of a man who had already accepted that the night ahead might not end peacefully. Beside him, Lena Brooks sat in silence. Neither of them had spoken much since leaving the penthouse. The hard drive rested in Ethan's inside coat pocket. Union Station rose ahead like a monument from another era. Tall columns, stone walls, wide windows reflecting the yellow glow of streetlights. Ethan pulled the car into a parking space 2 blocks away. We walk from here, he said. Lena nodded. They stepped out into the cold air. A train horn echoed somewhere far down the tracks. Union Station looked almost empty at this hour, but Ethan knew better. Large public places never truly slept. They entered through the main doors. The massive hall opened before them, high ceilings, marble floors, echoes of footsteps traveling through the quiet space. A few travelers sat on benches. A janitor pushed a cleaning cart across the far side of the hall. But otherwise, the station was nearly silent. Ethan checked his watch. Onbier. Elialte. Pem. 4 minutes, he said. Lena looked around nervously. What if it's a trap? It might be. That doesn't worry you? Ethan's expression remained calm. I've spent 20 years dealing with men who smile while setting traps. And the trick, he said quietly, is not stepping where they expect. A woman approached from the far side of the hall, mid-30s, dark coat, confident stride. Her eyes locked onto Ethan immediately. Agent Sarah Chen. She stopped a few feet away. You're Mr. Calloway. That depends who's asking. She gave the faintest hint of a smile. Fair answer. Her eyes moved to Lena. You must be Mrs. Brooks. Lena nodded. Yes. Chen looked around the hall once before speaking again. Do you have the drive? Ethan studied her carefully. How do I know you're really FBI? Chen pulled out a badge, but Ethan didn't even look at it. Instead, he asked a question. What did Noah Mercer do during the Chicago financial inquiry in 2016? Chen didn't hesitate. He exposed 2 shell companies tied to offshore laundering and nearly destroyed my case in the process. Ethan nodded once. That sounds like Noah. He reached into his coat and pulled out the hard drive. Chen accepted it carefully. Her expression shifted as she examined it. You have no idea what this could expose. I have a general idea. Chen looked up. Your brother was either incredibly brave, she paused, or incredibly reckless. Ethan answered quietly. He was both. Chen slipped the drive into her coat. Once we confirm the data, this investigation becomes federal priority. Lena asked softly. And Aiden? Chen hesitated. If he's still alive, the people chasing him will try to find him before we do. Before Ethan could respond, a loud crack echoed through the station. Glass shattered near the entrance doors. People screamed. Chen's eyes widened. Down. Ethan grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her behind one of the stone pillars. Another gunshot rang through the station. Travelers scattered across the marble floor. Footsteps, fast, purposeful. Chen looked toward the entrance. 3 shooters. Ethan kept his voice calm. They followed us. Chen pulled her weapon. Stay behind me. But Ethan didn't move. Instead, he looked toward the far exit of the station. They're not here for the drive. Chen frowned. What do you mean? Ethan's voice was cold now. They're here to make sure we never reach the FBI. Another gunshot echoed across the station. The men were getting closer. And somewhere 30 floors above the city, a 6-year-old girl slept in Ethan Calloway's penthouse, unaware that the war her father had started was about to explode into the open. The first bullet struck the marble pillar inches above Ethan's shoulder. Stone dust sprayed across the floor. Lena gasped and pressed herself closer to the column. Union Station exploded into chaos. Travelers ran in every direction. Suitcases rolled across the floor. A janitor abandoned his cart and disappeared through a side hallway. Agent Sarah Chen crouched beside Ethan, her pistol drawn and steady. 3 shooters, she repeated, her eyes scanning the hall. Possibly 4. Another shot cracked through the station. One of the overhead lights shattered. Ethan remained calm. Too calm. Lena looked at him in disbelief. How are you not panicking right now? He spoke quietly, because panic is exactly what they want. Chen leaned slightly past the pillar and fired twice. One of the gunmen ducked behind a row of benches. They're not amateurs, she said. They're controlling the exits. Ethan's eyes moved quickly across the station. Entrances, windows, movement, patterns. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him something unexpected about dangerous people. They followed plans, and plans could be broken. There's a service corridor behind the ticket counters, Ethan said. Chen glanced at him. You know this building well? I invest in rail infrastructure. Another gunshot echoed. A bullet slammed into a pillar across the hall. Chen nodded. Then we move. She leaned out again and fired twice more, forcing the shooters to duck. Now! Ethan grabbed Lena's hand and pulled her across the marble floor. They ran low, staying behind the ticket counters. Another shot rang out. A bullet ricocheted off the stone floor behind them. Lena stumbled. Ethan caught her before she fell. Keep moving, he said.